Hey everyone, it's Jeannie, and today I'm sharing this really pretty purpley floral card featuring Simon Says stamps, beautiful flowers, pretty pink Posh, layered Bokeh stencil, and Rubbernecker stamps French script background. To start off my card, I am using the main image from the Simon Says stamp, beautiful flower stamp set, and this is one that is part of my collection and has been for quite a few years, mainly because when I need to mass produce a card, this is the stamp set I use because I don't even color it. I'll just go ahead and stamp it out, almost similar to the positioning I have here, and then I will stamp out a sentiment in a colored ink and call it a day. As you can see, there's a ton of details on this. There are little sketched lines and it just shows you where all the dimensions should be. I went ahead and cut out a piece of Eclipse masking paper to stamp this image on it, and honestly you probably could skip the masking part of this card because, and although I use it to cover up my main image, I actually probably didn't even need it because I ended up inking around the image and it didn't really touch any of it. Of course, I just went ahead and did it because I already stamped it out, but I wasn't very precise with my fussy cutting. I was pretty loose with it. There's some parts that like I accidentally cut off. It just didn't really matter because my ink blending around the image avoided most of the actual image itself. Plus I end up coloring the floral image anyway. So even if you got ink on there, you would have covered it up with the Copic coloring and no one would have noticed. So for my inking, I used 3 different purple colors because I really wanted to create lighter purple near the image, and then as I work out to the edge of the card, I wanted it to be really dark. I went in first with shaded Lilac, and then I go in with Dusty Concord, and then Villainous Potion, which is my darkest purple. I will also use a bit of black soot to be at the edges just to really darken that up because I wanted that dark purple and I just think it looks so pretty. For ink blending, I am inking up on a piece of Nina Solar Crest 80-pound cardstock, which is not my favorite cardstock to ink blend on, mainly because it's not super smooth, and so it does take a little bit of work to get a smooth blend, and the camera is kind of picking it up as not blended very well, but it does end up pretty well blended. But my trick to doing that is inking up all the colors I want, kind of disregarding how not blended it looks, and then going in a second time. Once you go in the second time, it's usually pretty blended and it looks really nice. Next, I am pulling out Rubbernecker stamps French script background, and I am placing it over my card panel, but I'm only inking it up on the top left hand corner of this card panel. So I keep checking in my Misti just to make sure that I am inking up the right portions and I'm not inking up too much. I'm kind of like pretty careful with my inking. I'm heavier handed on the top upper hand left side of the corner. I'm kind of lighter handed with the letters that are closer to the image, mainly because I don't want to stamp directly on the image and I want it to kind of fade out. Once I'm happy with it, then we'll be done. Next, I am going in with my pretty pink Posh layered Bokeh stencils along with the Ink on 3 Shark Tooth White Atelier inks, which is a pigment ink. For this Bokeh stencil, this works really well with the white pigment ink. My first layer are the smaller circles, which I will only go in and lightly tap that white pigment ink on the stencil, and that's because I want different layers of opaqueness for the white pigment ink, and that's kind of what creates that bokeh look. For my second layer of this bokeh stencil, I go in with a heavier hand. Pigment ink kind of dries up pretty quickly, so you have to refill the ink pad pretty often. I think this is kind of dry. I haven't used it in a bit, but you can go in a second time and tap and you'll get like a very opaque color, as you can see with my stencil. I didn't even re-ink this because I knew that if I went in and I just tapped heavily, I would get that really opaque white. For my third layer, I kind of deal with it the same way I dealt with it for the first layer. I just wanted to tap in the colors, especially because these circles are a lot bigger. I didn't want that opaque white. I just really wanted that kind of translucent white where you can see the script, you can see the color behind it, and once I lift this layer you can see the effects of the bokeh, and I think it looks so pretty. Once I finish that, I'm going to go ahead and remove my Eclipse masking paper, and I will say again that you probably can skip this step, but if you do, make sure that you are not using the white pigment ink over the images because they do not play well with the Copic markers, because I had one area where it had pigment ink where I was supposed to color on the floral and it just didn't work very well. So just make sure that you're careful not to put any pigment ink right where your images are. Instead of going in with 3 Copic markers, I actually use 4. I'm using 4 mainly because I really wanted to use a dark purple for the shadows just to create more dimension, since I used black on my card panel and it just creates a little bit more depth. The cool thing about this stamp set is there's all these sketch lines on the florals which kind of indicates where the shadows are. So essentially what I did was I took my V09, which is my darkest color, went over the lines that are on the image with that V09 color and maybe added a little bit more. That was essentially how I picked out where the shadows would be, and then I worked my way out. I used V09, V17, V15, and then V12 for this floral image, and it just worked really well. It matched the inking that I did. I actually thought I would have a hard time matching up that purple. I kind of thought about it in hindsight, but it worked out. Once I went in with my V09, I actually ended up using my V15 instead of my V17, and I realized that when I get to the florals, because I'm like, wait, the color difference is a little bit more stark than normal. And then I looked at my pens and I was like, oh shoot, I didn't use my V17. So once I realized that, I go back in with the V17 and I'll go over all the like little shadowy areas and kind of just flick out until I get all that colored and blended out a little bit more. The cool thing about florals, especially with these sketch images, is that if you leave a ton of white space, it creates that dimension for you. And because the sketch florals already have those lines to show you where the shadows are, I'm basically just flicking where those lines are and adding color each time I change a pen. So it does make it easier just to color because I don't have to decide where I want the shadows. The image itself already tells me. And although it looks weird, you just gotta trust the process. At one point, I was like, oh my gosh, this looks so dark, because the V09 and the V17 are pretty dark colors that like I don't see a contrast of the color difference. But once you go in with that V15, which is a little bit lighter, you start to see it, and then it also kind of blends out because you are going over all the dark shadows that you had created. And I always leave a ton of white space because that will be the dimension that will be colored in by the V12, which is the lightest color. And that's my favorite part of this card because I just color the whole thing and I don't even have to worry about like the lines or anything. It's actually one that's pretty easy to color, and I haven't done it because of the fact that it just covers so much surface area and it does take a lot of space. But once you get to the last part, it works out so well. I am happy with how this turned out. I did have a bit of a regret that I didn't leave some white space, because sometimes with florals, I will leave a little bit of white space because it creates that extra dimension. But at this point, I was like, this card is so detailed with this floral that it really doesn't need that. And the white from the bokeh and kind of the white that is surrounding the florals, it was already white enough. So I just went in and colored the rest of the florals in that V12 color, and you can see that there is still that dimension even though there's no white. So I was really happy with it, and it went a lot faster than I expected it to, and it just looks really good, I think. I mean, if I were to do this again, I might leave a little bit of white, but it doesn't make a difference, honestly. For my sentiment, I just went with something super simple. I went with Love and Hugs. I stamped it out a second time in my Misti, but apparently I moved the paper because it just wasn't crisp, and you can see like double stamping. So I just went ahead, flipped around my paper and stamped it again. Trim this down, and then I'll just adhere it to the card. This card actually came together rather quickly, probably less than an hour, which usually my cards take about an hour and a half. So I was really happy with how this turned out. And then I decided that I wanted to add a bit of shadowing to the florals. And I don't really pay attention to a point of light, which a lot of people do when they color. I don't. So I just put it wherever I wanted. That is it for the card. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time with another video. Bye!